The voicemail icon glowed on Oliver's phone like a warning light in the dark. 13 messages, all from the same unknown number, all from her. His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. The apartment around him had gone silent in the way silence became its own presence, thick and watchful. Outside, the Toronto skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to the terror crystallizing in his chest. He pressed play. The voice crackled through the speaker, distorted by static but unmistakably feminine. Urgent. "Oliver, it's me again. You have to listen this time. In 3 days, you're going to hurt someone. You're going to think you have no choice, but you do. You always have a choice. Please, baby, I know you don't know me yet, but I know you. I know the scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off your bike at 12. I know you sleep on your right side. I know you're listening to this in apartment 1407, and you're thinking I'm insane. But I'm your wife, Oliver. I'm calling from 8 years in the future, and I'm trying to save you from what you're about to become." The message ended. Oliver's breathing had gone shallow, rapid. His fingers were numb. 3 weeks earlier, the apartment had seemed like a fresh start. Oliver Chen had spent most of his 24 years avoiding commitment, drifting between sublets and shared spaces across the city. The graphic design work came sporadically, enough to cover rent and instant ramen, not enough for anything resembling stability. But his aunt had died, left him a small inheritance, and for the first time in his adult life, he could afford his own place. The building on King Street West was all glass and steel, the kind of development that had sprouted like chrome mushrooms across downtown Toronto over the past decade. The apartment itself was sterile in its newness. White walls, laminate floors in a shade of gray that pretended to be concrete. A kitchen with appliances that had never been used. The landlord, a perpetually distracted man named Richard, had handed him the keys with barely a glance, already scrolling through his phone as he walked back to the elevator. Oliver had liked the anonymity of it. No history, no ghosts. Just clean, empty space waiting to be filled. He set up his desk near the window, angled so he could see the CN Tower in the distance. He bought a plant, a succulent the girl at the store promised was impossible to kill. He downloaded a meditation app. This was going to be different. This was going to be the version of himself he'd been trying to find. The first voicemail came on a Tuesday. He'd been working on a logo for a vegan meal kit company, hunched over his tablet with his third coffee of the afternoon going cold beside him. The phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, assuming it was spam. Later, making toast in the kitchen that still smelled faintly of paint and new carpet, he listened to it. Oliver. The woman's voice was soft, almost tentative. "I don't know if you'll believe this, but I had to try. My name is Sophia. We haven't met yet, at least not from your perspective, but we will. And I need to warn you about something that's going to happen. Please, just be careful. Trust your instincts, don't ignore the signs." He deleted it, frowning. Some kind of scam, probably. Weird approach, but everyone was trying something new these days. The second voicemail came the next morning. "It's me again. I know you deleted the first one. I know you think this is crazy. But Oliver, you need to understand. In your timeline, you're about to make a choice that changes everything. I can't tell you too much. Time works in strange ways, but I can tell you this. Pay attention to apartment 1408, the one directly above you. Something is wrong there." This time, he didn't delete it. He played it again, listening to the cadence of her voice, the way she said his name with a familiarity that made his skin prickle. There was affection there, woven through the urgency, or he was imagining it. He was probably imagining it. That night, he heard footsteps above him. Not unusual in an apartment building, he told himself. People walked around their homes. But these footsteps had a strange quality, irregular and heavy, like someone pacing in distress. Back and forth, back and forth. The pattern went on for hours, finally stopping around 3 in the morning. Oliver lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracking the sound. When it finally ceased, the silence felt worse. The voicemails continued. Every day, sometimes twice a day. Unknown number. Always her voice. The woman in 1408, her name is Claire. She's afraid of him. You're going to hear something through the ceiling. Don't ignore it. Oliver, I'm running out of time. The convergence point is close. You have to act before Thursday. He became obsessed. He played the messages on repeat, analyzing every word, every breath, every pocket of static. Her voice had become familiar, intimate in a way that disturbed him. She knew things, small things, the scar on his shoulder, the way he organized his Photoshop layers, his habit of counting his steps when he was anxious. He tried calling the number back. It went straight to a disconnected tone, the kind that suggested the number didn't exist in any conventional sense. On the 4th day, he heard the scream. It pierced through the ceiling at 2:47 in the morning, a raw sound of pure terror. Oliver bolted upright in bed, heart slamming against his ribs. Above him, there was a crash, the sound of furniture overturning, then heavy footsteps, running, a door slamming, then nothing. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands, thumb hovering over 911. But what would he say? I heard a scream. People screamed for all sorts of reasons. Maybe she was watching a horror movie, maybe they were having a fight. Maybe he was overreacting because some stranger had been leaving him cryptic voicemails about the apartment above him. He didn't call. The voicemail that came the next morning was different. Her voice was fractured, desperate. Oliver, you heard it. I know you did. You heard her scream and you didn't do anything. That's what you do in the original timeline, too. You tell yourself it's not your business. You tell yourself you're imagining things. And 3 days from now, you find out she's dead. They arrest the boyfriend, but they never find enough evidence. He gets away with it, and you live with the guilt. It eats you alive, Oliver. It eats us both alive, because I spend every day married to a man who can't forgive himself for the silence. Oliver's hands were ice cold. He played the message again and again. The guilt she described, he could feel it already, a phantom pain in his chest. But this was insane. This was some elaborate prank, or he was having a breakdown, or something he couldn't explain was happening, and he was too rational to accept it. He went upstairs. The hallway on the 14th floor was identical to his own. The same bland carpet, the same energy-efficient lights. He stood in front of 1408, listening. Silence. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. Hello, is everything okay? The door opened a crack. A woman peered through the gap, pale and hollow-eyed. She was younger than he expected, maybe 30, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Can I help you? I'm from downstairs. I just wanted to check if everything was all right. I thought I heard something last night. Her expression shuddered. Everything's fine, thank you. She moved to close the door, but Oliver saw it then, the purple-green bloom of a bruise along her jawline, barely covered by makeup. Are you sure? He pressed. Because if you need help, I said everything's fine. The door closed firmly. He heard the deadbolt slide into place. Oliver stood in the empty hallway, his reflection ghostly in the elevator doors at the far end. He'd seen the bruise. He'd seen the fear in her eyes. and he'd let her close the door. The voicemail that night was the longest yet. His name is Marcus. He moved in with her 2 months ago. She tried to leave him once and he broke her wrist. She's trapped, Oliver, and she's running out of time. On Thursday night, they're going to have another fight. He's going to push her and she's going to hit her head on the corner of the kitchen counter. He'll panic and call 911, claim it was an accident. And maybe it is, in a way, but she'll be dead, and you could have stopped it. The woman's voice, Sophia's voice, cracked on the last word. He could hear her crying, small gasping sobs that made something in his chest constrict painfully. I know you're scared. I know you don't know what to do. But Oliver, you have to try. You have to at least try. Because if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering. And I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. I can't live in a timeline where we're together, but you're not really there. You're just a shell, haunted by the woman you didn't save. Thursday came. Oliver called in sick to his only active client, claiming food poisoning. He spent the day in his apartment, pacing the same path he'd heard above him, listening. The building was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. At 8:47 p.m., his phone buzzed. Another voicemail. It's happening now, right now. Oliver, please. He could hear it as the message played, the sound filtering down from above. Raised voices. A man shouting. A woman's voice pleading, the words indistinct but the terror clear. Oliver moved without thinking. He grabbed his phone, called 911 as he ran to the door. 911, what's your emergency? There's a domestic disturbance. Someone's in danger. 1408330 King Street West. Please hurry. He took the stairs 2 at a time, breath burning in his lungs. The sounds were louder now, impossible to ignore. Breaking glass, a scream that cut off abruptly. The door to 1408 was locked. Oliver pounded on it with both fists. Open the door, police are on the way. Silence fell on the other side, sudden and complete. Then footsteps, approaching. The door swung open. The man standing there was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of casual handsomeness that probably charmed people easily. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can I help you? Oliver could see past him into the apartment. Claire was sitting on the couch, very still, her hands folded in her lap. There was blood on her forehead. Is she okay? Oliver's voice came out steadier than he felt. She fell, clumsy. The man's smile widened. But we're fine. Thanks for your concern. I called the police. The smile dropped. Something dangerous flickered across the man's face, then vanished behind a mask of calm. You did what? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The next few hours were a blur. Police, paramedics, Claire being led away, wrapped in a blanket, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Marcus, handcuffed, arguing loudly about his rights. Officers taking statements. Oliver telling them about the voicemails, the warnings, the bruise he'd seen. They looked at him like he was crazy. One officer, a woman with tired eyes and gray threaded through her dark hair, asked him to play the voicemails. He pulled out his phone, opened the voicemail app. The messages were gone. All of them. The unknown number wasn't in his call history. It was like they'd never existed. I swear they were there, he said, hearing the desperation in his own voice. She told me about Thursday. She told me about apartment 1408. She knew. The officer nodded slowly. Sometimes we hear things, feel things. Intuition can be powerful. You did the right thing, calling it in. You might have saved that woman's life. They left eventually. Oliver returned to his apartment, shell-shocked and exhausted. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and indifferent. His phone buzzed, one new voicemail, unknown number. His hand shook as he pressed play. "Thank you." Sophia's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You changed it." The timeline shifted. She's alive because of you, and that means everything else changes too. Our future, it's different now, better. I can feel it already, like a weight lifting. I don't know if we'll still meet. Time is strange that way. But Oliver, wherever you are, whatever happens, thank you for being brave. Thank you for choosing to act. I love you. I've always loved you. The message ended. Oliver stood at the window, watching the city wake up around him. Somewhere out there, Claire was safe. Somewhere out there, in a timeline he couldn't see or touch, maybe there was a version of him that found happiness. A version that didn't carry the weight of silence and inaction. His phone buzzed again. He looked down, heart stopping. The message was from Sophie Chen. Not Sophia, Sophie. A message on a dating app he'd signed up for weeks ago and forgotten about. "Hey, I know this is random, but I saw you went to Ryerson for design. I did too, graduated in 2023. Small world. Want to grab coffee sometime? There's this place on Queen West that makes the best cortados." Attached was a photo. Blonde hair, warm smile, familiar eyes. Oliver's breath caught. He stared at the message for a long time, watching the cursor blink, waiting for his response. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, apartment 1407, a man who had heard warnings from the future stood at the intersection of what was and what could be. He typed, "Coffee sounds perfect. When are you free?" And somewhere, in a timeline that no longer existed, or perhaps had always existed or would exist, or had been prevented from existing, a woman who loved him smiled. The phone in his hand felt warm, real. The voicemail icon was gone, but the choice remained, echoing forward into whatever came next. The blue glow from the laptop screen painted shadows across Detective Marcus Webb's face as he watched the live stream for the fourth time that night. The camera angle was fixed, looking down at a worn leather armchair, the kind with deep creases that held the shape of whoever sat there most often. In the chair, bound and gagged, was a woman. She couldn't have been older than 30. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically toward something off-camera, something the viewers couldn't see. The chat window beside the video scrolled with messages from anonymous users, some begging the broadcaster to stop, others typing things Marcus had learned to never read twice. But it wasn't the woman's terror that had frozen Marcus in place, his coffee growing cold in his hand. It wasn't even the casual cruelty of the killer's movements, as gloved hands appeared periodically in frame, adjusting the camera, tilting the woman's chin up for a better view. It was the wallpaper behind her. Faded green damask, a pattern Marcus had stared at for 3 years, every morning, every evening, from the sofa in his own living room. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had been a different man. Not happier, perhaps, but more certain of the boundaries between his work and his life. He lived alone in a second-floor flat in Bloomsbury, the kind of place estate agents called characterful, because the radiators clanked and the floorboards groaned when you walked to the bathroom at night. He'd moved there after the divorce, seeking the anonymity that only London could provide. A city large enough to let you disappear even when you were standing in the middle of it. His days followed a rhythm. Wake at 6, black coffee, no sugar. The walk to the tube took exactly 12 minutes if he didn't stop for a second cup at the cafe on Marchmont Street, which he usually did. The Metropolitan Police Headquarters loomed gray and institutional, the kind of building that seemed designed to remind you that bureaucracy outlasted individuals. Marcus had spent 18 years in the force, the last 6 in digital crimes, tracking predators who thought encryption made them invisible. The first stream had appeared on a Tuesday. The tech unit had flagged it during a routine sweep of the dark web, one of dozens of illegal broadcasts they monitored daily. But this one was different. The production quality was too good. The killer didn't hide behind glitchy webcam footage or low-resolution feeds. This was high definition, professionally lit, almost cinematic. The first victim had been a man in his 50s, bound to a chair in what appeared to be an empty warehouse. The killer never appeared on camera. Only hands, always gloved, always deliberate. The murder itself had been quick, clinical, a single shot to the head. No theatrics, no taunting. Just the act, streamed to an audience that had grown to 300 viewers before the feed went dark. Marcus had watched the recording 6 times, cataloging every detail. The acoustic signature suggested an enclosed space, likely underground. The chair was generic, purchasable from a dozen retailers. The gun was a Glock 17, standard issue for half the criminals in Europe. There were no windows, no distinguishing marks, nothing that screamed, "I am here, come find me." The killer was careful, methodical, and he was just getting started. The second stream came 4 days later. A woman, this time, younger, strapped to a metal table. Same production quality, same gloved hands, same single shot. The chat had exploded with activity, users flooding in from encrypted forums, treating it like entertainment. Marcus had felt his stomach turn as he read the messages. The casual way people discussed another human being's final moments as if critiquing a film. His partner, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, had joined the investigation after the second victim. She was sharper than Marcus, quicker to see patterns, but she approached the work with a detachment he'd never managed. "It's a show," she'd said, leaning back in her chair as they reviewed the footage. "He's performing. The streams are his gallery. Then we need to figure out who's buying tickets," Marcus had replied. They'd spent days tracing IP addresses, finding dead ends and proxy servers that pinged across continents. The killer was using military-grade encryption, routing his signal through nodes in countries with no extradition treaties. Every lead dissolved like smoke. The third stream changed everything. Marcus had been home, heating up leftover curry in his small kitchen when his phone buzzed with an alert. The killer was live again. He'd grabbed his laptop, settling into his usual spot on the sofa, the leather armchair positioned across from him at an angle. The stream loaded quickly. High definition, as always. And there, on his screen, was a woman bound to a chair. But this time, as Marcus leaned closer, his breath caught in his chest. Behind the woman, barely visible in the background, was a bookshelf. The books were out of focus, but he could make out the spines. Red, blue, a thick green volume he'd received as a gift from his daughter years ago. A collection of Sherlock Holmes stories. He looked up from the screen, across his living room, at the bookshelf against the far wall. The same books, the same order. His heart began to hammer. He stood slowly, laptop in hand, and walked toward the armchair. The camera angle in the stream seemed to be positioned roughly where he was standing. He looked down at the chair. It was empty, of course. Just worn brown leather and the faint indentation where he sat most nights. He looked back at the screen. The woman in the stream was crying now, her shoulders shaking. The chair she was bound to was identical to his. The wallpaper behind her, that faded green damask, was the same pattern that covered his walls. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. He set the laptop down on the coffee table and walked the perimeter of his flat, checking every window, every lock. The door was bolted from the inside. The windows were latched. He lived on the second floor. There was no fire escape, no easy access from the street. He checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the narrow kitchen. He was alone. He'd been alone all evening. Back in the living room, he picked up the laptop again. The stream was still going. The woman was trying to speak through the gag, her words muffled and desperate. Then the hands appeared. The same gloved hands from the previous streams, reaching into frame to adjust the camera. They were deliberate, almost gentle, as if the killer wanted to ensure every viewer had the perfect angle. And then the hands moved to the woman's throat. Marcus watched, frozen, as the life drained from her eyes. It took longer this time, more personal. When it was over, the stream cut to black. The chat erupted in chaos, messages flying past too quickly to read. Marcus slammed the laptop shut and stood in the darkness of his living room, his breathing ragged. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he arrived at headquarters before sunrise. Sarah found him in the tech lab, surrounded by printouts of still frames from the stream. "You look terrible," she said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "I need you to look at something," Marcus said. He pulled up the stream on one of the large monitors and paused it on a frame showing the background. "Do you see that wallpaper?" Sarah squinted. "Green, floral pattern, what about it?" "That's my living room." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "What?" "The wallpaper, the bookshelf, the chair, it's my flat. The killer is streaming from my flat." Sarah stared at the screen, then back at Marcus. "Have you checked for cameras?" 3 times I tore the place apart, nothing." "Then it's a replica. He's recreating your space somewhere else." Marcus shook his head. "Look at the details. The crack in the plaster near the ceiling, the way the light hits the bookshelf. It's not a replica, it's exact." "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, "that's impossible. You were home during the stream. You would have known if someone was there." "I know," he said. "That's what terrifies me." They launched a full investigation into Marcus's building, interviewed neighbors, checked security footage from nearby businesses, searched for any sign of forced entry. Everything came back clean. No one had seen anything unusual. No one had heard anything. Marcus's flat was a sealed box, and yet somehow a killer had used it as a stage for murder. The forensic team found the 3rd victim 2 days later in an abandoned building in Southwark. The cause of death matched what they'd seen in the stream: strangulation. But the location was wrong. The room where they found her body was concrete and bare. Nothing like the warm, lived-in space shown in the video. "He moves them," Sarah theorized. "Kills them in one place, dumps them in another." But that didn't explain the background. It didn't explain how Marcus's living room had appeared in the stream when he'd been sitting in it at the same time. The 4th stream went live on a Friday night. Marcus was at the station when the alert came through. He and Sarah crowded around a monitor along with 3 other detectives. The video quality was flawless as always. A woman in her 30s, bound to the now familiar leather armchair, the green damask wallpaper, the bookshelf. And then, slowly, the camera panned to the left. Into the frame walked a figure. A man, dressed in dark trousers and a rumpled button-down shirt. The figure kept his back to the camera as he approached the woman, but something about the way he moved made Marcus's blood run cold. "Pause it," he said. Sarah froze the frame. The figure was partially visible now, turned at an angle. Marcus could see the shape of his jaw, the slope of his shoulders. "Go back," Marcus whispered. "Go back to the beginning of the stream." Sarah complied. They watched again as the feed started, as the woman struggled against her bindings. And then, as the figure entered the frame, Marcus saw it. The shirt the man was wearing had a coffee stain on the sleeve, a small brown oval near the cuff. Marcus looked down at his own sleeve. The same stain, from that morning when he'd knocked over his cup reaching for a file. "That's me," he said. The words felt foreign in his mouth. "That's me in the video." The room went silent. Sarah stared at him, then at the screen. "Marcus, you've been here all day. You were in the briefing at 6. This stream went live at 6:15. "I know," Marcus said. "But that's my shirt, that's my walk, that's—" The figure on screen turned toward the camera, and Marcus felt his reality fracture. The face staring back at him from the monitor was his own. Same dark eyes. Same scar above the left eyebrow from a suspect's elbow 5 years ago. Same tired lines around the mouth. It was him, but it wasn't him. The movements were too smooth, too perfect, like watching himself in a mirror that showed a reflection a half a second delayed. "Deepfake," one of the tech specialists said. "It has to be AI-generated. Someone's mapped your face and mannerisms onto a model." But that didn't explain the apartment. It didn't explain how they'd replicated every detail down to the crack in the plaster and the coffee stain on his shirt. Marcus watched his digital twin on the screen move toward the woman. He watched himself pull on gloves. He watched himself wrap hands that looked exactly like his own around her throat. And he watched the life leave her eyes while an audience of strangers cheered in a chat window he couldn't close. The stream ended. Marcus stood in the darkened office, surrounded by colleagues who were now looking at him with something that might have been suspicion, or might have been pity. Sarah's hand was on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. "We'll figure this out," she was saying. "This is someone who knows you, Marcus. Someone with access to your space, your life. We'll find them." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was thinking about the streams, about the victims, about how each one had occurred when he had an alibi, when he was surrounded by people who could confirm he was nowhere near the crime. About how carefully orchestrated it all was. About how someone had turned him into a ghost, a digital puppet that murdered while he slept, while he worked, while he went about his life believing he was in control of his own existence. The 5th victim's body was found on Sunday. Same cause of death, same pattern. But this time, when they processed the scene, they found something new. A small camera, no bigger than a button, hidden in the ceiling of Marcus's apartment. It had been there for months, the tech team determined. Watching, recording, learning. Feed in an algorithm thousands of hours of footage until it could recreate not just Marcus's face, but his mannerisms, his movements, the exact way he held his shoulders when he was tired. They swept the entire flat and found 6 more cameras. In the bedroom, in the bathroom, in the kitchen. watching his every move. Whoever had placed them had gained access months ago, probably during one of the rare times Marcus traveled for work. They'd installed the cameras, left no trace, and disappeared. The realization was crushing. He'd been violated in a way that made his skin crawl. Every private moment, every vulnerable instant had been captured and used to build a version of himself that existed only to kill. Sarah led the investigation into Marcus's recent past, looking for anyone who'd had opportunity and technical skill. They found nothing. No forced entry on the dates they'd narrowed down. No suspicious activity on his building's limited security footage. Whoever did this was a professional, someone who understood digital surveillance and physical security in equal measure. The sixth stream never came. After the cameras were discovered, the killer went dark. The forums buzzed with theories. Some users claimed the whole thing had been an elaborate hoax. Others believed the detective had finally caught up with the killer. But Marcus knew better. The silence was tactical. The killer was adapting, finding a new method, a new victim. Or perhaps just waiting for the perfect moment to reveal that all of this, every stream, every murder, had been building towards something larger. Marcus moved out of his flat the next day. He couldn't stay there, couldn't sleep in a space that had been turned into a theater for death. He took a room in a bland chain hotel near the station, the kind of place with beige walls and art that meant nothing. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there were cameras here too, wondering if somewhere, someone was watching, building another version of him, perfecting the code. The deepfake had been so accurate that even he'd had moments of doubt, fleeting seconds where he'd wondered if maybe he was capable of things he couldn't remember. The rational part of his mind knew it was impossible. He had alibis, witnesses, proof. But the irrational part, the part that lived in the space between sleeping and waking, whispered that maybe the boundaries between his digital twin and himself weren't as solid as he wanted to believe. Sarah visited him in the hotel on a Tuesday evening, bringing files from the case. They spread them across the small desk, looking for patterns they'd missed. The tech team thinks they can trace the algorithm's origin, she said. The style of the deep fake suggests custom software, not something off the shelf. If we can find who wrote it, we find the killer, Marcus finished. But he didn't feel the rush of hope he should have felt. Instead, there was only exhaustion, the kind that settled into bones and made everything feel heavy. You should take some time, Sarah said. Leave the city. This case, it's too close. Marcus shook his head. He used my face to kill people. I'm not walking away from that. But as the days stretched into weeks with no new leads, no new streams, Marcus began to wonder if walking away was exactly what he should do. The victims' families had been notified. The investigation was ongoing, and somewhere in the sprawling digital wilderness of the dark web, a killer was waiting. Maybe for Marcus to drop his guard, maybe for the world to forget, or maybe for nothing at all, content in the knowledge that he'd created something that would outlive him, a ghost in the machine, a perfect copy of a man who'd spent his life chasing shadows, now condemned to be one himself. The case file remained open, labeled Case Number 404. The glitch, the media had started calling it. A detective hunting a version of himself. A killer who existed everywhere and nowhere. And in the quiet moments when Marcus caught his own reflection in a window or a screen, he had to look twice to make sure it was really him looking back. The woman standing in the doorway was his wife. Same silver hair pulled back in the loose bun she always wore. Same navy cardigan with the missing button on the left cuff. Same faint scar above her right eyebrow from a childhood accident she'd told him about 40 years ago. But when Robert reached out to touch her shoulder, she flinched away from him like he was a stranger trying to grab her on a crowded street. "Margaret," he said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. She stared at him with eyes that held no recognition. Her lips parted, and sounds came out. They weren't words, they were fluid and musical, rising and falling in patterns that felt almost familiar. The way a dream feels familiar even though you've never experienced it before. The syllables rolled over each other, soft consonants and elongated vowels that belonged to no language Robert had ever heard in his 60 years of life. She spoke for nearly a minute, her hands moving in small, precise gestures, before she stopped and waited, watching him with the polite attention of someone who has just asked directions from a foreigner. Robert's knees went weak. He gripped the door frame. It had been 3 days since she'd left for her walk. 3 days before, on a Tuesday morning that had tasted of rain and coffee, Margaret had kissed him on the cheek and told him she was going to walk down to the seawall. She did this every Tuesday and Thursday morning, had done it for the 12 years since they'd retired and moved to Vancouver from Ontario. She liked to watch the cargo ships in the harbor and feed the ducks near the marina. She always took the same route. Down Burrard Street, left on Pacific, then along the water until she reached the little bench near the aquarium where she'd sit and read whatever mystery novel she'd picked up from the library the week before. Robert had been making toast when she left. He remembered the smell of burning butter because he'd been distracted, trying to find the sports section of the newspaper. When the smoke alarm went off, he'd cursed, waved a dish towel under the sensor, and forgotten entirely about her kiss still warm on his cheek. She should have been home by 11. By noon, he'd called her cell phone 6 times. By 2 in the afternoon, he was in the car, driving her route, scanning the sidewalks and parks. He'd filed a missing person report at 4. The police had been kind but not particularly concerned. She was an adult. No signs of foul play. People sometimes needed space. Give it 24 hours. But Robert knew. He knew the way you know when you've left the stove on even though you can't remember checking. He knew the way you know someone is standing behind you in a dark room, even before you hear them breathe. Margaret wouldn't have left without telling him. Not after 42 years of marriage. Not when her pills were still in the bathroom cabinet and her reading glasses were folded on the nightstand. He'd spent 3 days becoming intimate with fear. He learned that fear tastes like metal and sits in your stomach like a stone. He learned that you can exist in a state of pure, crystalline panic for 72 hours straight without your heart actually exploding, even though it feels like it should. He'd driven the route 17 times. He'd called her sister in Toronto. He'd contacted the hospitals, the shelters, the morgue. He'd posted her picture on Facebook, even though he barely knew how to use it, and their daughter Emma had to walk him through it over the phone from her home in Seattle. And then, on Friday evening, just as the sun was setting over the North Shore Mountains and painting the sky the color of a bruise, she came home. She walked up the front steps of their small house on West 15th Avenue the same way she always did, one hand trailing along the black iron railing. She was wearing the same clothes, the green walking shoes he'd bought her last Christmas, the waterproof jacket because it had been drizzling that Tuesday morning. Her purse was still over her shoulder, but she wasn't Margaret. Not the Margaret who had left. Robert stood in the doorway now, watching this woman who wore his wife's face and felt reality tilt sideways. She was looking past him into the house with mild curiosity, the way you might look into a shop window at a display that doesn't quite interest you. No fear, no relief, no emotion at all. "Where were you?" he asked, though his throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. "Margaret, where have you been?" Everyone's been looking for you." She spoke again in that liquid, impossible language. This time her tone was gentler, almost apologetic. She gestured toward the interior of the house, then at herself, then made a questioning motion with her hands. Robert stepped back without thinking, and she walked inside. She moved through the living room like a tourist in a museum, pausing to examine the framed photos on the mantel. The Afghan draped over the couch that her mother had crocheted 30 years ago. The stack of crossword puzzle books on the coffee table. She picked up their wedding photo, the one where they were impossibly young, and squinting into the prairie sun outside the church in Regina. She studied it for a long moment, her head tilted slightly to one side. Then she set it down carefully and moved on. "Margaret." Robert followed her, his voice rising. "Margaret, please, it's me, it's Robert. We've been married for 42 years. We have 2 daughters, Emma and Claire. You love mystery novels and you hate cilantro and you have a birthmark shaped like a comma on your left hip. Please." She turned to look at him then, and for just a second something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, confusion, pain. But it was gone before he could name it, replaced again by that polite, distant curiosity. She walked into the kitchen. Robert watched her open the refrigerator, study its contents with the same careful attention she'd given the living room. She pulled out a yogurt, examined the label, put it back. She tried the tap at the sink, let the water run over her fingers, then shut it off. Every movement was deliberate, exploratory, like she was learning the space for the first time. "I'm calling Emma," Robert said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling someone." "But who did you call when your wife came home but wasn't your wife anymore? When she looked at you like you were a kind stranger who'd let her into his house?" He called Emma anyway. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, is there news?" "She's here," Robert said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, high and thin. "She came home. But Emma, something's wrong. Something's very wrong." "What do you mean she's home? Is she hurt? Let me talk to her." Robert held out the phone toward Margaret. She looked at it, then at him, then said something in that flowing, impossible language. On the other end of the line, Emma's voice went sharp with panic. "Dad! Dad, what was that? What's going on?" "She doesn't remember me," Robert said quietly. "She doesn't speak English. She doesn't speak anything. Emma, I don't know what to do." Emma was on the next flight out of Seattle. The hours until she arrived were the longest of Robert's life. Margaret, because what else could he call her, wandered the house, touching things with careful fingers, occasionally speaking in that strange tongue as if she expected him to understand. She seemed neither distressed nor comfortable, just endlessly, distantly curious. And when she got tired, she lay down on the couch, not the bed they'd shared for decades, and fell asleep almost instantly. Robert sat in the armchair across from her and watched the rise and fall of her breathing. In sleep, she looked exactly like the woman he'd woken up next to for 15,000 mornings. The same slight frown between her eyebrows. The same way her left hand curled under her chin. He must have fallen asleep himself because the next thing he knew, Emma was shaking his shoulder and dawn light was creeping through the curtains. His daughter looked exhausted, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed. "Where is she?" Emma whispered. Robert pointed to the couch. Emma crossed the room slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal. She knelt beside her mother and reached out to touch her shoulder. Margaret's eyes opened. She sat up, looked at Emma, and smiled. It was a polite smile, friendly but impersonal, the smile you give a barista who hands you your coffee. She spoke again in that liquid language, a rising inflection at the end like a question. Emma's face crumpled. Mom, it's me. It's Emma, your daughter. What happened to you?" But Margaret just kept smiling that terrible, empty smile. They took her to the hospital. The doctors ran tests, asked questions, shone lights in her eyes, and checked her reflexes. Physically, she was fine. Perfect, even. No signs of trauma, no evidence of drugs in her system, no indication she'd been harmed. Her blood pressure was better than it had been at her last checkup. The MRI showed nothing unusual. The neurologist, a tired-looking woman with gray streaks in her black hair, pulled Robert and Emma aside. "I've never seen anything quite like this," she admitted. "The language she's speaking doesn't match any known linguistic patterns. We brought in a linguist colleague, and even he's baffled. It's consistent, though. She's not just making random sounds. There's grammar, structure. It's a real language. It's just not one that exists." "What about her memory?" Emma asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you fix it?" "We're running more tests, but I have to be honest with you. I don't know what we're dealing with here. Amnesia, yes, but the language component. That's not typical of any amnesia presentation I've encountered. Usually, if someone forgets their identity, they still retain language. They might forget their name, their family, their past, but they don't forget how to speak English if that's their native tongue." Robert felt something crack inside his chest. "So, what are you saying?" The neurologist hesitated. "I'm saying we need to keep her for observation. I'm saying this is beyond my area of expertise. I'm saying I don't have answers." They kept her overnight. Robert and Emma stayed in the waiting room, drinking terrible coffee from paper cups and not talking about what they were both thinking. When they were finally allowed back into Margaret's room, they found her sitting up in bed, watching the morning news on the television with that same distant interest she'd shown everything else. That's when Robert saw it. A hospital bracelet on her right wrist. He'd assumed the nurses had put it on when they admitted her. But when he leaned closer, squinting in the fluorescent light, he felt the floor drop out from under him. The date printed on the bracelet was clear and crisp. April 7th, 2029, 3 years in the future. Robert's vision blurred. He gripped the bedrail. "Emma," he said, and his voice came from somewhere far away. "Emma, look at this." His daughter leaned over, read the date, went very still. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That's a mistake. It has to be a mistake." but the bracelet looked old. The edges were slightly frayed, the plastic yellowed as if from age. And there were other details, small things Robert noticed now with growing horror. The style of the bracelet was different from the ones he'd seen on the other patients. More advanced, the barcode was longer, more complex, and the hospital name printed on it wasn't Vancouver General Hospital. It said Vancouver Neurological Institute, a place that, as far as Robert knew, didn't exist. Emma was talking to nurses, demanding explanations, her voice getting louder and higher. But Robert just stood there, staring at the woman who looked like his wife, trying to understand. She met his eyes. For a long moment they looked at each other across a distance that felt like years, like centuries, like the space between stars. And then she spoke. One word, in English. Her first word in English since she'd come home. She said, "Sorry." Her voice was Margaret's voice. The tone, the slight rasp from years of smoking in her 20s, the way she softened the R. It was her. It was absolutely her. And then she switched back to that impossible language, and the moment was gone. Robert never got a real answer. The doctors couldn't explain the bracelet. They suggested it was a prop. Maybe Margaret had been confused, wandering, found it somewhere. But they couldn't explain where. They couldn't explain the language. They couldn't explain why a woman with no history of mental illness had suddenly, completely forgotten her entire life. After a week, they released her into Robert's care with a list of medications and appointments, and a social worker who checked in twice a week. Margaret, because he still called her Margaret, would always call her Margaret, lived with him, but was not with him. She learned to navigate the house, learned where the bathroom was, where the kitchen was. She ate when food was put in front of her. She slept on the couch. She watched him with those curious, empty eyes. Sometimes, late at night, Robert would sit beside her and talk. He'd tell her about how they met at a church dance in Regina, how she'd stepped on his foot and laughed, how they'd danced until the lights came on. He'd tell her about Emma's first steps, Claire's graduation, the trip they took to Italy for their 30th anniversary. He'd tell her about the life they'd built together, the life that existed now only in his memory. She'd listen. She'd smile sometimes. Once, she reached out and patted his hand, a gesture of comfort that felt practiced, borrowed from whoever she was now. Emma came to visit every weekend. Claire flew in from Montreal. They all tried to reach her, to pull her back. But the woman on the couch remained a visitor in Margaret's body, polite and pleasant and utterly, completely gone. Robert kept the hospital bracelet. He locked it in a drawer in his study, along with the police reports and the medical files and all the documentation of those 3 missing days. Sometimes he'd take it out and stare at the date. April 7th, 2029. He tried not to think about what it meant, about where she'd been, about what might happen in 3 years when that date finally arrived, about whether the woman he loved was still somewhere in there, trapped behind eyes that no longer recognized him, or whether she was somewhere else entirely, 3 years ahead, waiting in a place he couldn't follow. At night, when the house was quiet and Margaret was asleep on the couch, Robert would stand at the window and look out at the dark street. He'd think about that Tuesday morning, the smell of burning toast, the kiss on his cheek. The last normal moment before the world tilted sideways and never quite righted itself again. She never came home. Not really. Someone else came home in her place, wearing her face, walking in her shoes, living in her house. And Robert learned to live with that, the way you learn to live with any wound that never quite heals. He learned that love doesn't end when the person you love disappears. It just changes shape, becomes something harder and sadder and infinitely more patient. Every day, he waited for a sign, for an answer, for April 7th, 2029, for Margaret to come home.
The Scripted Casebook remains open. Subscribe to the archive. Share the evidence. Leave your verdict below. Some secrets are better shared.